So then, with that out of the way, don't want to be accused of throwing out too much fear porn. You know, people will say it. Even when you're just reporting the news, you get accused of putting fear porn out. But one of my favourite topics, as we all know here, and it's one of the hardest topics to get to the truth in, I must admit, but it's UFOs. And I've had an interest in UFOs all my life, since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, right up until present day. And I'm not much taller than knee-high to a grasshopper now, before anyone cracks any wise jokes out there. But I came across another story just before we went on air today, and I've got a few other things to say about this after we read this story that comes from the New York Post. And the headline here says, Senators briefed by the Pentagon on reported UFO sightings. Now, this is the latest installment of this. I use this term really loosely, and you'll see why after I kind of lay this stuff out, but this disclosure that seems to be going on right now. We can go back to December 2017 when all of this kicked off, when the mainstream media really changed their attitude towards reporting this stuff. And we had to talk about the Pentagon program, ATIP, all that kind of good stuff. Well, this here again is just the latest installment in all of this. And what is all of this? Well, I'll go on to explain that in just a moment. But to see what it says here, and it comes from a writer called Kenneth Garger, it says 3 US senators were reportedly briefed by the Pentagon on Wednesday about recent reports detailing UFO sightings by Navy pilots. Now, the revelation, reported by Politico, comes days after President Donald Trump disclosed that he too had been briefed on the unidentified aerial phenomenon encounters. Remember, that's the technical, that's the Pentagon, and it's the British Ministry of Defence way of classifying UFOs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. The information sessions were organised by the Navy and also included staff from the Under-Secretary of Defence for Intelligence, sources told the site. Now, briefing requests by Congress members of key oversight committees have been on the uptick since it was revealed that the Pentagon's shadowy aerospace threat identification program still investigates claimed sightings of alien spacecraft, as was exclusively reported by the Post last month, and we went over that story at the time. Now, several US Navy pilots told the New York Times that they had reported to the program spotting UFOs while training over the East Coast back in 2014 and 2015. While flying at least 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, the pilots, who were stationed on the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt, told the papers they routinely witnessed strange objects flying at hypersonic speeds, performing maneuvers beyond the physical limits of a human crew. Senator Mark Warner, the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, confirmed with Politico that he was at Wednesday's briefing. Quote, if naval pilots are running into unexplained interference in the air, that's a safety concern Senator Warner believes we need to get to the bottom of. And that comes from his spokesperson, Rachel Cohen. Now, members of Congress and their staffers of the Armed Service and Defense Appropriations Committee have also been briefed, officials told Politico, adding more Pentagon meeting requests are being made. Now, Donald Trump, while discussing the UFO reports with ABC News' George Stephanopoulos, last week said, do I believe it? Not particularly. Now that there is quite important. And that shows that there is some game afoot. almost like one part of Washington is going with all of this release, dare I say it, disclosure. Yet Donald Trump, on the other hand, he's kind of pouring cold water on it. Yeah, he believes what the Navy pilots are saying, he's not knocking them, but he's not really into the whole UFO disclosure as it's happening right now. And the best place that I can point anyone to get the full story on all of this would be towards Dark Journalist over on YouTube. He had a video out just at the weekend called To the Stars, TTSA, CIA, UFO Disclosure Cult, a special report. Now, you'll know if you've listened to the Kev Baker Show for some time, myself and Ben Emlyn Jones, myself and Scotty, I think even myself and Ryan Gable, when we done the show on disclosure, we were really questioning what are the motives and who is behind the TTSA. Well, once you listen to Daniel, the dark journalist, laying out all of the evidence that he's gathered in his 2 hours, 12 minutes presentation over on YouTube, there will be no doubt, absolutely no doubt left in anyone's mind that what we're watching here is a CIA psyop. Now, just one thing to really back that up without having to go all the way over to watch that right now is the fact that the guy at the front of this, Luis Elizondo, the guy that was all over the world's mainstream media back when all of this news started to break at the end of 2017, the Pentagon, not once, but twice, have now denied that he was anything to do with the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. Well, let me just restate that. Luis Elizondo, the guy that was supposed to be running this secret program that was looking into the whole UFO topic and subject and all of these sightings that we've had by Navy pilots, when asked by the Pentagon, and John Greenwald from the Black Vault, he's got the statements, he's got the freedom of request stuff over there, he's got stuff from the Pentagon press officer. They're saying, look, this guy had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the program that he is talking about. Now, that doesn't mean that the program doesn't exist or didn't exist, but it then calls into question just what's going on here. And we've gone over the To the Stars Academy board of directors in the past, and we've pointed out all of its connections to alphabet agencies, and in particular the CIA. Well, if you watch the Dark Journalist video, he takes it about 10 steps further, and he really does a great job of showing that this isn't just possibly some kind of intelligence operation. This is definitely a controlled psyop propaganda program being rolled out not only on the American people, but on the people of the world. And on the other side, we'll get into why they would be doing that. And it's all in the title of that program, folks. Advanced Threat Identification Program. That threat that we've heard about before. Join me after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to today's live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show, right here on the #1 network, Truth Frequency Radio, where silence is consent, and where you get protection from deception. www.tfrlive.com. Blast that out to all your friends, your families, your bot contacts over on Facebook, over on Twitter, any social media that you're on, or anti-social media, as I like to call it. Let's really not just grow this show, but grow the network and take it to another level again. And looking at Bill in the chat room, you see, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is the kind of thing that puts a spring in my step. Bill in the chat room says, just had about 50 customers walking into South Street Spot, Pond Circle, K-Mobile, and they gave me some weird looks hearing Kev talking, about the UFOs. That's how you start to spread the word. Keep it up, Bill. I love it. And of course, Bill also, he was saying R.I.P. Stephen Hawking. Yes, Stephen Hawking, you know, he does come back from beyond to still promote the Freaky Friday. I almost said Kev Baker's Freaky Friday there. The guys would have killed me if I said that. But, you know, Stephen Hawking is one scientist that I really did like to follow during his time here on the Earth. And if you want to look at somebody for inspiration, you know, you look at the life story of Stephen Hawking. So, R.I.P. Dr. Stephen Hawking. And I've seen somebody asking, is he dead? He most certainly is, and I hope he doesn't turn into some Mandela effect. But before the break, we were talking about this whole UFO phony disclosure that's going on right now. And I call it phony disclosure because it's coming to us from people that are connected and still work for the CIA. Now, if you go and check out The Dark Journalist, you're going to hear him talking about the fact that Luis Elizondo, or Lou, as he's affectionately dubbed by the Mockingbird media that he appears on so often these days, he is still contracted to work for the government. You've got a couple of people on the board of directors who have spent, in total, put together, over 60 years working for and with the CIA. And this is a CIA rollout, a PSYOP, a controlled disclosure. Now, that doesn't mean that everything they're going to tell us is lies. Far from it. And when you think about the disclosure that's come so far, what have they really told us? Yeah, they've shown us a couple of grainy videos, granted, I get that. But have they really taken us any closer to knowing what's out there, what's been here in the past, where do they come from, how many species, all the kind of things that you would really expect with a full disclosure? Or do they appear to be hyping the threat of an alien force out there? And with that threat comes the justification for lots of funding. And all of that funding will then be put under the national security bracket, and we will not know where all of that money goes. All of the missing billions and trillions that fell down the back of the Pentagon couch over the years, all of a sudden that will be written off as them defending us from this alien threat. It's not the first time we've heard about a threat, is it? Can you remember the warning that we got from that Nazi that came over to America as part of Paperclip, Werner von Braun? Maybe you don't. Well, let's listen to Carol Rosen, Dr. Carol Rosen, who worked alongside Werner von Braun.
Good morning. My name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a sixth grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Werner von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space. And I said, you know, teachers don't stop until June. He said, no, you have to understand, this is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies, he said, against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system, the first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids. And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words...
Now, we'll pause it there, and we'll just go back a little bit, because A, it's one of my favourite clips ever, and it's a guilty pleasure listening to this, but how relevant is listening to this now? And this is an older clip. This comes from when they were having the disclosure discussion at the press club in Washington. The date escapes me, but this was a good few years ago, folks. And just what are they kind of hyping now? The Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program.
Space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies, he said, against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system. The first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids. And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat.
And that's exactly what we're getting what we are seeing being played by the CIA right now. We're in that window of time, folks, when they're playing this last card, as Carol Rosen describes it. And this has been obviously a plan a long time in the making. Werner von Braun, like I said, he came over as part of the Operation Paperclip exchange of all of the Nazi minds and the scientists from the Nazi war machine. When some went east, some went west. And Werner von Braun, obviously somebody that had his finger very much on the pulse, and he left Carol Rosen with that warning. And we're seeing it now. And we've got this To the Stars Academy, who seem to be at the very front of this. And like I say, a very questionable organisation. And I don't blame Tom DeLonge in any of this. I think he's been used. They've seen him as a very good vehicle to hitch their PSYOP propaganda program onto. Somebody that's going to appeal to younger people, really hoodwink them into what looks like on the surface truth coming out, right? But then, if again, I refer back to The Dark Journalist, and I implore you all to watch that if you're interested in this topic. The guy, in my opinion, is doing some of the finest work in breaking all of this stuff down, and so much more besides. But he shows a photograph of Tom DeLonge, Peter Lavenda, somebody that's a writer, a researcher on all the UFO topics, and then somebody really interesting at the White House, no less. And this was back in the time when Obama was in office and Hillary was expected to be a shoo-in for the president. Yeah, they're stood there schmoozing with, guess who? John Podesta. Now, The Dark Journalist makes a really compelling case for the fact that all of this was going to be rolled out with Hillary in the Oval Office, but that went wrong. We've seen that went wrong. And this is why now I think we're seeing a split when it comes to what's coming out of the To the Stars Academy program and people like Luis Elizondo. And remember, we can't really trust Luis Elizondo if the Pentagon are telling us that in reality, he had nothing to do with the program that he's talking about. So why is the Pentagon saying one thing and you've got the CIA pushing another thing? Well, this all points towards the fact that Hillary Clinton didn't get in, and there has been a split, and Trump got in. And Trump's an interesting character because we had Walter Bosley on the show here some time ago. Need to reach out to Walter again, but he was talking about the fact that Donald Trump's uncle was actually assigned the task of going and collecting up Nikola Tesla's papers after his death for the FBI. So we had Donald Trump the other day, who was asked by the reporter about his take on the Navy releasing some of this information, the advanced aviation threat thing going on. And Donald Trump, he almost poured cold water on it because, he said, I believe the pilots and things, but I really don't buy into this UFO threat. Well, then today, like maybe 5 minutes before doing the show, I took one last search for any news on this topic, and it was breaking at the time, but this comes from Forbes here, and I think this goes a long way to support what Dark Journalist is saying, and it goes a long way to supporting the take that there's some kind of split happening in Washington right now over this disclosure subject. And the headline from Lisette Vyotko, sorry, Lisette, if I butchered your name there, but the headline reads, Washington, but not Trump, suddenly taking UFOs more seriously. And it says Washington lawmakers, but not President Trump, are abruptly taking reports of UFO sightings seriously, with senators, quote, coming out of the woodwork to receive classified briefings, the result of a growing acknowledgement, destigmatization, and revamped record keeping of mysterious reports from US Navy pilots. And it's got 4 bullet points here. It says, quote, I did have one briefing or one brief meeting on it, the president said in an ABC News interview. But people are saying they're seeing UFOs. Do I believe it? Not particularly. Excuse me, folks. We cough there. So it says, do I believe it? Not particularly. Next up, it says the sightings were by members of the US Navy. The mysterious aircraft were largely reported to be the same colour and shape as white Tic Tacs, emitted no exhaust, or didn't display visual evidence of having engines, and defied the laws of physics in both speed and flight duration. Now, such sightings have happened since the 1950s and 60s, according to Politico, but more recent ones were reported to the Pentagon after it launched a new UFO reporting program in 2007, and that is the ATIP program. Now, according to CNN, the Navy does not believe aliens have been flying around in US airspace, but for safety and security concerns, the Navy and the Air Force takes these reports very seriously and investigates each and every report, the Navy said in a statement. Now, the people behind this push, you've got the To the Stars Academy, who roll out Luis Elizondo constantly. And as I have stated, and you can do your own research on this, folks, you can go to the Black Vault, you can look at the timeline of all of this that John Greenwald has put together, but the Pentagon have stated not once but twice that Luis Elizondo, although yes, he did work for government, no denying that, he was nothing to do with this program. And somebody else who's at the forefront of all of this and was responsible for getting the funding that went to ATIP was Senator Harry Reid. Now, Harry Reid, he funded this program to the tune of 22 billion over, I think it was billion. I might be million. Billion would sound more realistic, but that was over a 5-year period. And in reality, what that means is all of that money went to Bigelow Aerospace, because Bigelow Aerospace were the only people that really bid for that contract, which should be suspicious in the first place. So that looks like it was a transfer of money happening there. And is it impossible that Harry Reid, or is it possible that Harry Reid wants to get to the bottom of all of this UFO stuff? Could he be the politician that would really want transparency when it comes to UFOs? Well, I can't say either way, but again, I refer to the Dark Journalist, and he brings up an interesting point that Harry Reid has voted against the audit of the Federal Reserve, not once, not twice, but 13 times. So for somebody who wants full transparency when it comes to the UFOs, he doesn't seem to be somebody that's after full transparency in the past. So keep our eyes on this, folks. It's very interesting. But anytime you hear people talking about Luis Elizondo, To the Stars Academy, this kind of stuff, please try and point out, Elizondo can't be trusted. He's still contracted to the government. There's a good chance he's working for the CIA. And that this disclosure that we're getting right now, this threat that they're starting to really ramp up in the mainstream media, could well just be justification for more US tax money. And if you're in America right now, that means all of you funding the CIA. You know, they'll be able to justify going after big, huge budgets on the back of this kind of thing. And that money, some will trickle down to the likes of Bigelow and their other companies like Lockheed Martin. But then a lot of that money will just disappear the way it often does. Call it the deep state, call it the cabal, the black ops, you name it. That's where that money is going to go. And can we really trust people from the CIA to be bringing us truth when in reality, they're the ones that try to tell us that JFK Kennedy was taken out by a magic bullet in Dealey Plaza back in the day? The same CIA, along with the British government, who lied us into a war with Iraq on the back of that dodgy WMD story that they spun all of us. Yeah, well, let's be very, very wary when it comes to this current disclosure that's going on right now.